Tonight, a story from a small island in the North Atlantic. It is true, and it is old, and there is a mystery at the center of it. But there is nothing in it that will trouble you. Nothing sudden. Nothing frightening. You do not need to follow closely. If your attention wanders off somewhere warmer, let it. If you fall asleep in the first few minutes, you have not missed anything at all. The story will carry on quietly without you, and it will still be here another night. Settle in. Let your shoulders come down. We will start slowly. About 20 miles west of the Isle of Lewis, out past the edge of the Outer Hebrides, there is a scatter of small islands called the Flannan Isles, 7 of them, if you count generously. They are not large. They are green on top and sheer at the sides, and the sea moves around them all the time, in every weather, whether anyone is watching or not. The largest is called Eilean Mor, which simply means the Big Island. It is about 17 acres. You could walk across it in a few minutes, if the wind allowed. Nobody lived there. For centuries, shepherds from Lewis rode out in the summer to leave sheep grazing on the grass, and rode back again. There was a small ruined chapel on the island, built of stone, low and roofless, associated with a 7th century saint called Flannan. The shepherds had customs about the place. They would not stay overnight. Some accounts say they would not carry certain things ashore, or would turn sunwise before entering the chapel. These traditions come to us second-hand, written down by visitors who found them charming, so it is hard to know how seriously they were held. What is certain is simpler. It was a difficult island to reach, and easy to leave alone. Then, at the end of the 19th century, the Northern Lighthouse Board decided a light was needed there. The waters west of Lewis were busy with shipping bound for the Atlantic, and the Flannans sat in the middle of that traffic, unlit. Building it took 4 years. Everything had to come by boat, up the cliff, in whatever weather the Atlantic was offering that week. The engineer was David Allen Stevenson, from the family of lighthouse builders. The tower itself was modest, about 23 meters tall, but the island lifted it high, so the light burned roughly 100 meters above the sea. They cut 2 landing places into the rock, one on the east side, one on the west, and ran narrow railway tracks up from each, with cranes to lift the stores. The keepers had a small block of rooms at the base of the tower. A kitchen. Beds. A store. A place to sit. The light was first lit on the 7th of December, 1899. It ran on paraffin vapor, and it had to be tended by hand through every hour of darkness. 3 keepers lived on the rock at any one time, with a 4th ashore on leave. They rotated, 6 weeks out, 2 weeks home, weather permitting. The weather did not always permit. The 3 men on the island in December of 1900 were these. James Duckett was the principal keeper. He was 43, an experienced man, married, with 4 children living in Lewis. Thomas Marshall was the second assistant, 28 years old. And the third was Donald MacArthur, from Breskleet on Lewis, who was not a regular member of the crew at all. He was what the service called an occasional keeper, filling in for William Ross, who was ashore, unwell. So the crew that winter was 2 career lighthousemen and 1 local man standing in. That is close to everything we know about them as people. There are a few scraps. There is a note in the records of a small disagreement about a set of wages, and some remarks in an inspection report about the light being kept well. Nothing more. We do not know what they talked about in the evenings, or what they thought of one another, or how they passed the time. Later writers have filled that silence in, with tempers and quarrels and men going strange in the isolation. None of that is in the record. It is invention. So we will leave the silence where it is, and simply say that 3 men were living on a small island, tending a lamp, in the darkest weeks of the year. On the night of the 15th of December, a steamer called the Archtor was passing the Flannans, on her way from Philadelphia to Leith. Her crew noticed that the light was not burning. This was worth noting, but not worth turning back for. Ships lose sight of lights in weather all the time. The Archtor carried on, reached Leith, and there her captain reported it. For reasons that are not fully documented, the report did not reach the Northern Lighthouse Board quickly. There was Christmas in between. The relief vessel, a tender called the Hesperus, was due at the island anyway, and had been due for some days, but the sea had been too rough to sail. So for 11 days, nobody went. This is worth sitting with for a moment, because it is the least dramatic and most human part of the whole story. Nothing was covered up. No one was careless in any way that would have looked careless at the time. A light went dark in midwinter on a remote rock, in a season when boats often could not get out, and the machinery of reporting moved at the speed such machinery moved at in 1900. The Hesperus finally left Brestclete and reached the island on the 26th of December, the day after Christmas. There was a routine to a relief visit, and the routine began before anyone landed. The keepers were meant to run up a flag when the vessel came in sight. They were meant to have their empty provision boxes down at the landing, ready to be swapped for full ones. Someone was meant to be waiting on the steps. None of that had happened. There was no flag. The landing was bare. The Hesperus blew her steam whistle, and then fired a rocket, and waited. Nothing moved on the island. A small boat was put out, and the relief keeper, a man named Joseph Moore, went ashore alone and climbed the steps to the lighthouse. He found the outer gate closed, and the main door closed, and inside, no one. He looked in the kitchen and the bedrooms, and came straight back out again, unwilling to stay by himself, which seems entirely reasonable. He went back down to the boat, and returned with 2 of the ship's men, and together they searched the island properly. It did not take long. It is not a large island. The 3 keepers were not on it. Here is what they found inside, as recorded in the reports written at the time. The beds were unmade. The ashes in the grate were cold. The clock had stopped, which it would do, unwound, after a few days. The kitchen was tidy. The dishes and utensils were clean and put away. The lamp in the tower had been cleaned, the wicks trimmed, the reservoir filled. It was ready to be lit. The logbook had been kept up in the usual way, with entries for the 12th, 13th and 14th of December, and a note on a slate for the morning of the 15th, weather observations, the sort of thing that would be copied into the book later in the day. It never was. And there was one detail that has held people's attention ever since. Of the 3 sets of oilskins and sea boots kept for going outside in bad weather, 2 sets were gone. 1 set was still hanging in its place. That set is generally thought to have been Donald MacArthur's. So 2 men appear to have dressed properly for foul weather, and 1 appears to have gone out without doing so. That is what the evidence shows. What it means is a matter of opinion, and always has been. Outside, on the west landing, there was damage, and quite a lot of it. This is the part of the story that gets the least attention and probably deserves the most. The Northern Lighthouse Board superintendent, Robert Muirhead, came out to investigate, and he wrote it all down carefully. A wooden box, fixed in a crevice in the rock about 110 feet above sea level, had been torn open and its contents scattered. Ropes that had been stowed in it were strewn about, and 1 length of rope had been carried up and left tangled among the rocks higher still. Iron railings along the path were bent over. A block of stone estimated at more than a ton had been shifted out of its place. Turf had been torn away from the cliff edge, well above the landing. In other words, at some point during that week, water had come up onto that side of the island with enormous force, far higher than the sea normally reached, high enough to strip and break things at 100 feet and more. This is not unusual on Atlantic rocks in December. It is simply not something you can stand near and survive. Muirhead knew the men. He had appointed all 3 of them himself, and he said so in his report, which reads, even now, as the writing of someone genuinely sorry. His conclusion was straightforward. He believed the keepers had gone down to the west landing to secure a box and some ropes that were at risk in the heavy weather, and that while they were there, an exceptionally large wave had come up over them, and they had been carried into the sea. He noted the missing oilskins, and suggested that the 3rd man may have followed the other 2 out in a hurry, without stopping to dress, perhaps having seen something from the doorway. He was careful to say that this last part was his opinion and not a fact. It remains the most likely explanation anyone has offered in 125 years. It is not proof. Nobody saw it. There were no bodies, and the sea in that place would not be expected to give any back. 3 men were lost, and their families were told, and the light was relit, and the service went on. We will not dwell on it. It was quick, whatever it was, and it was a very long time ago. And here is the thing that I find genuinely interesting about Eilean Mor, more interesting than the disappearance itself. Almost everything you have probably heard about it was made up afterwards, and we can watch it being made. In 1912, 12 years later, an English poet called Wilfred Wilson Gibson published a poem about the Llannan Isles. It is a good poem. In it, the searchers find a meal left half-eaten on the table and a chair knocked over on the floor. Those details are not in any of the reports. Gibson invented them, as poets may. But they were so vivid that they detached themselves from the poem and drifted into newspapers, then into books of mysteries, then into everything since. Later still, someone produced a set of dramatic logbook entries, describing storms that never appeared in the weather records, and one of the men weeping. Those are a fabrication, and a fairly recent one. The real log is dull. It records wind and rain. So the island has become a small, quiet laboratory for how a legend forms. Not through lying, exactly. Through a poem, a good phrase, a retelling, and then 100 years of people preferring the better story. The dull version was true all along, and available all along. What can we honestly say, then? That 3 men went out onto a rock in the Atlantic in December, and did not come back in. That the sea that week was violent enough to move a stone weighing a ton and tear turf off a cliff at 100 feet. That the lamp was filled and ready, the dishes were washed, and the ordinary work of the place had been done right up until it stopped. That is the whole of it. Anything more is guesswork, and the guesswork does not improve with age. The lighthouse is still there. It was made automatic in 1971, so no one has lived on Eilean Mor since. The light works on its own now, out in the dark, turning through the same weather, watched by nobody. The sheep are still put out on the grass in summer, and taken off again. The little stone chapel is still roofless. And the light comes round, and goes, and comes round again, on a schedule, all night, every night, whether there is a ship out there to see it or not. So that is Eilean Mor. A tidy kitchen, a filled lamp, and a question that has stayed open for 125 years, which is quite all right. Not everything gets an answer, and the ones that stay open are often the gentlest to hold. Picture the island now, if you like. Green on top, empty, the light swinging slowly out over the water. Nobody there to mind it. If you are still awake, there is another story waiting whenever you want it. And if you are not, that is better still. Good night.